Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Bullony Basketball. So you guys know I'm here with Johnny. How's the additional week been? I mean, it's been 2 weeks since our last show, so how's it been, Johnny?
Well, I'd like to say it's been very fun and interesting, but I guess that would just kind of be a lie. Currently, where I'm at, our shelter in place has been extended another 30 days until the end of April. So, been stuck in the house, but that's been giving me some time to kind of relax with the family, do some more schoolwork, but just kind of keep up with everything with this whole sports hiatus going on. Not a whole lot that interests me, but just doing what I can with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of exactly where I'm at with it. It's just like not really much interesting things going on, not much like fun things to do, really. And I mean, obviously, like this is like an NBA related show, so we talk about the NBA and stuff like that. But I mean, today we're gonna kind of take a different approach. We're kind of just gonna go through some like all-time things that we have like thoughts about, and I mean, there's many topics like along with like some lists at the end. I think it'll be pretty interesting. So, the first one, did you want to introduce this topic, Johnny? The first one.
Yeah, I got it. So yesterday, kind of just had this idea pop into my head. I was like, let's kind of take a look at some controversial topics. Obviously, the biggest and most controversial topic is the LeBron versus Jordan. We're not going to get into that today, but kind of put together a little list of some either-or type things, kind of just some debatable topics that I see a lot of people talk about, and I thought it would be cool if we kind of talked about them ourselves. So the first one I'm going to introduce is Phil Jackson or Gregg Popovich. Who's the better all-time coach? And I'll let you go first, Garrett.
Okay, well, personally, I mean, both of them obviously are great coaches. I mean, Phil Jackson won 11 rings as a coach, won 6 with the Bulls, 5 with the Lakers. And Gregg Popovich, I mean, he's only won 5 championships, but he's kept this, like, Spurs dynasty going on for, like, 22 years. And even if it does come to an end this year, like, nobody can even hate on, like, what he's done over that time. So I think both are great. The only thing is that we haven't really seen much of Phil Jackson with kind of like a lower talented team. Like, I mean, with Gregg Popovich, we had teams where it was like just LaMarcus Aldridge or, just like DeMar DeRozan and stuff like that more recently. And he's still been able to get the job done. With Phil Jackson, I mean, sometimes there were times where he was kind of lower and he still had a guy like maybe Kobe. And I think the way that he tried to implement, especially, I mean, this isn't really more of a coaching thing, but still, like, his coaching philosophy was kind of, like, influenced on the Knicks, on the New York Knicks, like, mainly when they had, like, Melo and Porzingis, the year they had, like, Rose, Joakim Noah, Brandon Jennings, all those guys, and he tried implementing, like, the triangle offense still with that. Didn't really work out. I don't know if that's just because there's so much dysfunction. I mean, with all that being said, though, I probably have to give the edge to Gregg Popovich, but obviously both of them, I think we can both agree, both are probably top 5 coaches of all time.
Yeah, no doubt. And I just thought a lot of people would go Phil Jackson. It's interesting you went Gregg Popovich because that's the route I took as well. A couple things stand out to me about Popovich. Same franchise for his whole coaching career, right? Take a look at the coaches that have just come from Gregg Popovich, like Budenholzer, and now you got James Borrego with the Hornet. So he kind of has his own coaching tree, which I think is interesting. The Spurs immortal playoff streak, 22 straight seasons in the playoffs. Most likely going to come to an end this year, but with this whole hiatus, it depends on what happens, and we'll see where that goes. And kind of the third point I lean to is just he's had talented teams and players, Gregg Popovich, but he's never had a team as good as those mid-'90s Bulls, and he's never had a player as good as Jordan. He's had a lot of consistency. He's always been able to get the job done. Just look recently how good the West has been in the past. But even with just DeRozan and Aldridge, he's still been able to sneak into the playoffs. And I know I'm saying just DeRozan and Aldridge, but when you look at the top teams in the West, that really isn't a lot compared to what they have.
Yeah, and I mean, like, when we're comparing them, it's like saying just DeRozan and Aldridge, like, it makes sense when you're thinking of, like, Kobe and Shaq or, like, a Jordan and Pippen type level players. But, I mean, yeah, I'd probably have to say Gregg Popovich, like you said, he's only been with one team his whole time. And I mean, there were rumors that, like, I guess Phil Jackson, they almost wanted him out of as the coach in the late '90s too. Kind of probably one partial reason why that dynasty maybe broke up. Because I mean, everyone knew like Jordan's gonna do Jordan things. Scottie Pippen was dealing with injuries near the end. But there was a bunch of questions with Phil Jackson mainly. So with that all being said, both are great, but I'd probably have to give the edge to Popovich.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, both are top 5 coaches, maybe even top 3. I just thought that was an interesting argument to get into. The second one I have on this list is kind of an interesting one, and it's not necessarily debating how good a player is or comparing him to somebody else, but it's, will LeBron still be in the league if and when Bronny is?
Well, will he still be in the league? Personally, I think he will. I know it might just be like 1 year, if anything, but I think he probably wants to be like the first person to actually like play with his son in the NBA. Now it's kind of tougher saying like, will he be a teammate of his? And I mean, this is all just kind of like assuming, like predictions. It's really hard to tell because you don't know like what teams are going to be bad in like about 4 years when Bronny's in the draft. But I'm going to lean toward yes. I feel like LeBron has that power that he probably will try to do anything possible to play with his son. Even if it is just for one season, or, you know, just like whatever, a few games, I don't even know, but like just to do anything to maybe play with him. So I actually went with yes, that he will play in the same time as Bronny and probably on the same team.
Yep, I tend to lean with you on this one as well. The whole team aspect, like you said, is very much up in the air. That's something that's almost impossible to predict, but I do believe he will still be in the league. When we look at the whole GOAT argument, a lot of LeBron's argument is his longevity, right? Doing things that a lot of people have never done before. This would be one of those types of things. I do believe that the hiatus that we're experiencing right now might help him. Being able to take 2, 3, who knows, it might be more than 2 months off. Who knows what they're going to do with the rest of the season? This is just giving him time for his body to rest because he had been playing so many games this season. So I think that'll help add to his ability to play an extra year. And so that kind of makes me lean towards the yes.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I know he said he wants to be a Laker for life, but he recently said that like on Instagram Live or whatever. But I think more importantly, like if he had an opportunity to play with his son, he probably would. But I mean, yeah, we could, I guess, talk about the Lakers topic though right now. So I guess we all know like Kobe and Shaq won 3 rings together. And Shaq was the Finals MVPs for those three teams. But who was like maybe the more important or significant piece to those teams? What's your take on this, Johnny?
I'm going to go with Shaq here. I kind of sat down last night and I really looked into the numbers. And if you look at the numbers during the 3 NBA Finals that they played, it's not like Shaq put up just barely better numbers than Kobe. I mean, he was putting up insane numbers during, I forget which series it was. I think it was the one against the Sixers. He averaged like 30 points and 15 rebounds. Like those are just insane numbers. His game score numbers were just about double Kobe's for each of those series as well. The only argument you can make for Kobe here is that he was the quote-unquote leader of the team off the court and whatnot, but Shaq was the engine that made that team run.
Well, what I would say to this, I mean, I agree with you. I think Shaq was the more important player for those titles, but I don't think he was always necessarily like the best. I mean, like there were times like in that Pacers series where he would get in foul trouble and then Kobe would come in and he would close out the game. So he still like had that capability at such a young age. And I know he took it personal, like against Iverson in 2001, 2002 against the Kings in that series in the Western Conference Finals. A lot of that was just like, I mean, we could get into that probably another time, but like I just think that in that series specifically, it wasn't necessarily Shaq dominating. he was getting a lot of attempts at the free throw line for sure. But I mean, Kobe's going to do Kobe things. But yeah, Shaq, obviously 3 finals MVPs. And I think when people look at, like, when you compare, like, that Lakers duo with other duos of all time, so, like, Jordan and Pippen, or, like, current Lakers, like LeBron and AD, whatever it is, I think everyone, the first question that comes to their mind is who's going to stop Shaq. And I think with that being said, like, Shaq is probably, like, the more important piece, because it's like he's too dominant down low, he's too big. But I mean, Kobe later in that time, was, I think maybe around 2002 to 2004 time, could have had an argument of being the better player then. And I mean, obviously he was good enough to get him 2 titles later on as well.
And you always hear from former players that Shaq is the most dominant player of all time. Like, if he really wanted to impose his will at every single point in time, he would have been the best player ever. And you kind of don't have the opposite with Kobe, but you have the whole thing that Kobe's mentality, the Mamba mentality, he's just a killer. And even if he wasn't putting up the numbers that Shaq was, he really was the guy that drove that team mentally 2-3 straight titles.
Exactly. I literally couldn't agree more with you there. So next one, we kind of have like 2 polarizing concepts here. So, like, biggest draft steals and busts. Well, how many did you pick for each one, first of all?
I went 5 for each.
Okay, yeah, that's what I did too. So biggest draft steals. Well, I also picked an honorable mention for, I think, just about all these. But you can go first with your biggest draft steals.
Okay, I guess let me preface this with this. First of all, Garrett and I did not kind of go over our list yesterday, so the first time you guys hear it is the first time we're going to hear it as well, so that's interesting. Second of all, there's no good way to define a draft steal, so as I go through my list, I'll kind of just explain why I put. But like I said, it's very ambiguous. First off, I think the first one isn't even debatable, and I went with Manu Ginobili, Hall of Famer, late second round pick. Ton of people passed on him, and he turned out to be either the second or third best player on all those Spurs championship runs with him, Duncan, and Tony Parker. Do we want to alternate, or do you just want me to run through my whole list?
You can run through your whole list, and then I'll go through mine.
All right, perfect. Number 2, I went with Kobe. Now, I guess another thing that I should say is when I'm looking at draft steals, I'm not necessarily looking at the time of the draft. Like, if people knew Kobe was going to be as good as he was, obviously he wouldn't have fallen to 13. And I know he wasn't getting a ton of hype. I just have Kobe here because somebody of his caliber to fall is incredible. Number 3, I have the GOAT, Michael Jordan. I know he went high in the draft, but to be the best player ever and not be drafted first kind of signals a steal to me. Number 4, I went with somebody current. I went with Giannis Antetokounmpo, mid-first round pick as well. Obviously didn't have the expectations of being the player he is today, but when you look back at it, big steal. And similarly, Kawhi Leonard at number 5, same story. Going to be one of the better players to ever play the game, and he fell to mid-first round.
Yeah, I really like that list. I mean, I can't really disagree, I don't think, with any of them. Even like the Jordan one, like you said, 3rd pick, might seem a bit crazy, but it's like the GOAT we're talking about. Like, how were 2 people picked above him? Even though, like, one was Hakeem, but still. So for my biggest draft steals, your first one was my first one. I also had Manu Ginobili, being like the second to last pick in the draft and going on to win 4 championships, be a multiple-time All-Star, multiple-time All-NBA player. Arguably could have been Finals MVP in 2005. That's kind of like what I think. But, I mean, this isn't even just NBA related, but, I mean, he beat Team USA, like, in 2004. Like, that's just an insane feat. Now, the rest of these, I didn't really have, like, any of these in order. I just, like, picked, like, my top 5 that came to my mind. The second one, I have Nikola Jokic, mainly because not many people thought much about him when he got drafted. He was a second-round pick, and he didn't even play the year he was originally drafted. So it took him, like, another year before he actually came in the league. So I think nobody had expectations from whatsoever, and now he's arguably a top 10 player in the league. Third, I had George Gervin, who was like the 40th pick in the draft. This was back like when the draft had like more than 2 rounds. Like he was picked in the 3rd round, which is just insane. And I mean, George Gervin, you could argue that he's probably a top 30, 40 player all time.
Shout out to the Iceman.
Yeah, shout out to the Iceman. Fourth one I have, I had to go with Isaiah Thomas. I think being the last pick in the draft, like that's just kind of, that almost just defines a person, especially for him to be like an All-NBA player, top 5 in MVP, multiple-time All-Star. I know it's kind of unfortunate what's happening to him right now with like the injuries and stuff. Hopefully he can bounce back and get back in the league. But I think with all he's accomplished, especially at his size of 5'9", like that's just, it's kind of like a storybook type of story, I guess. A storybook type of story. That's what it is. And then the fifth one, the fifth one was really hard. I was trying to think of a bunch of players. I mean, you said Kawhi, you said Giannis. Obviously, like Dennis Rodman was a late pick that could have helped. I just put Draymond Green. I think that he's been important to like 3 of the championships. He's been like such a good system guy for the Warriors. I don't know if they necessarily have the same like motor, same potential without him. And I mean, even with Durant, Curry, and Clay, that energy, firepower probably isn't there with Draymond. And then my honorable mention, I also put Kobe. I think being the 13th pick, it's a bit higher than a lot of these. I think all of these I have were like 2nd round picks. But yeah, I mean, it's Kobe, and being picked after 12 guys, it's kind of insane. But the only thing that was against him is that he had some players picked above him that were still really good, like Allen Iverson and Ray Allen and stuff.
Yeah, and for all the listeners out there, we could have done a list of 15 biggest draft steals and still left some players off. It's incredibly tough to just narrow it down to 5. You could do the biggest 2nd round draft steals, the biggest 1st round draft steals, the biggest lottery draft steals. So this is a very open-ended question, and that's kind of why our lists differ the way they do.
Yeah, exactly. So for biggest draft busts now, do you want to go first on this, or do you want me to go first?
You can start us off.
Okay, so first biggest draft bust. I think most people have come to agreement in this now. Anthony Bennett. The 2013 draft, nobody really thought it would be that good. But it's actually turned out better than a lot of people thought. Giannis, Victor Oladipo, C.J. McCollum, Dennis Schroeder, Rudy Gobert, Steven Adams. I can list like on and on. And this guy was picked first. And even though a lot of people had him going like 7th or 8th before the draft, I think that's a huge draft bust. And I mean, he was out of the league in about 4 years. Second, I have Darko Milicic. He actually had a pretty long career, which is kind of amazing. I believe he lasted like 10 years in the league. Never was a star. I don't even think he ever played like to the caliber of some starting centers in the league. But being picked above Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade in that order, that's not really that good. I mean, you're sandwiched with the top 5 picks, and 4 of them are first ballot Hall of Famers, and then you're just nowhere near their level. Third one I went was Hasheem Thabeet. He's kind of overlooked, I think, with draft bust. He was the 2nd pick in the draft, picked above guys like James Harden, Steph Curry, DeMar DeRozan. And, I mean, just because he was really tall, but he really didn't have that much skill and was out of the league pretty quickly, too. Fourth one, I might mess up this name, honestly, but Nikolos Gitishvili? I don't know. But he was the 5th pick in 2002. He was picked above guys like Carlos Boozer, Amari Stoudemire, and really like his career averages were like about 3 points a game, and he lasted like 3 years in the league. Being a top 5 pick like that, you'd expect more. And then the 5th one, I went way back, and I got LaRue Martin, who was like the 1st pick in 1972. He only lasted about 3 or 4 years in the league himself, averaged about 5 points for his career. And my honorable mention went to Michael Olowokandi, lasted about 10 years, averaged about, I think, 7 or 8 points a game in his career. But ultimately, he was on the Clippers for most of it, and I mean, a lot of that they actually were kind of successful in the early 2000s was because of like Elton Brand or Quentin Richardson or Corey Maggette, not really Michael Olowokandi whatsoever.
Interesting list. I like it. We're going to start off the same. Number 1, Anthony Bennett for me. Like you said, that draft really wasn't hyped up when at the beginning, the 2013 draft didn't have a ton of hype. But my whole thing with Anthony Bennett is a lot of teams didn't even have him as a lottery pick, and he ended up going number 1, which is kind of unfair for his status as a draft bust. But how is he not considered a bust when he did absolutely nothing? So that's why I have him at number 1. Number 2, I went with Sam Bowie. And it's not that he had like a horrendous career, but he's forever known as the guy drafted between Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon. So because of that, I kind of throw him there. Number 3, Darko Milicic. You mentioned him, so I'm not going to go into detail about him. Number 4 and 5 are somewhat recent, 2000s. Number 4, I went with Kwame Brown, drafted by Charlotte. Not that he's like a huge bust, I'd say, but everybody Charlotte drafted was essentially a bust outside of Kemba Walker. And then the 5th one, I'm going to go with Gregg Oden. And shout out to Gregg Oden because he was amazing in college. If it wasn't for injuries, I think he would have had a pretty decent career. But because of those injuries, I do have to consider him a bust.
Yeah, the only thing is I just didn't want to go with players that some of them like that had injuries because I feel like that's not fair to rate them because, I mean, obviously, I think all the guys on my list are players that are just, like, not good. Like, we saw them for enough time to realize they're not really effective. And I was thinking of putting Kwame Brown on there. The only thing is he lasted, I believe, longer than any of my guys on the list in the NBA. He lasted, like, 12 seasons. And, I mean, he actually did have one point where he was playing okay. I believe one year he averaged, like, 12-7 or 11-7 or something. And that's not good for really a first overall pick, but when you look at who was in that draft class, I think the only other person that might be a Hall of Famer in the top 10, maybe even in the whole draft class, would be like Pau Gasol. And, I mean, Pau Gasol, he's not like a top 10 player of all time. He might be top 50, 60, somewhere in that range. So with all that being said, that's why I kind of just didn't put Kwame in there.
That's perfectly fair to me. I kind of looked at it from the perspective of hype on draft day, and there was a lot of hype surrounding Kwame Brown, and he just never lived up anywhere near where that whole hype was. And that's kind of what we're talking about to all listeners out there, that you could take this 1,000 different angles. It all depends on the way you look at it.
Yeah. I just took it like relative, like to each draft class. I'm not, I mean, I'm sure there's others out there that are like worse, but I think I went with this mindset of like comparing each draft class. So, yeah, but we could get into now our top 5 lists of each position. You can go first with your top 5 point guards if you want, Johnny.
Alrighty, let's start it off here. And once again, another preface to the listeners. We did not kind of go back and forth with this last night when we were deciding what to talk about. And so we might have some players in different positions than each other. But we're kind of just going to go with how we perceived it. And for me, best point guard ever, in my opinion, is Magic Johnson. I don't think there's a whole lot of debate here. I think that's going to be kind of standard between the two of us. Number 2, I went with Oscar Robertson. I know he's an older guy, as in that he played in the older era, but the numbers he put up are just so insane that I couldn't not include him on the list. Number 3 is a current player, Steph Curry. I think he has the opportunity to pass Oscar and possibly pass Magic Johnson, depending on how the back half of his career goes. Number 4, I went with another Laker legend in Jerry West, the logo. To be the logo of the NBA must mean that you had a pretty good career, I'd say so. Number 5, I was kind of torn between John Stockton and Chris Paul. I have John Stockton written down, but I kind of want to lean Chris Paul. So to me, they're kind of both tied for 5.
That's an interesting list. So, I mean, not too much different in the first half. Second half, there is. First, I have Magic Johnson as well. Like you said, there's not really much arguing that. He has multiple finals MVPs, multiple championships, and he was playing, like, probably arguably at the pinnacle of Lakers basketball. Second, I also have Oscar Robertson. I think the fact that he averaged a triple-double for over his first 5 years altogether, I know he only averaged it for 1 year, but if you look at like the first 5 years of his career, altogether he was averaging a triple-double as well. MVP, you know, he was a really good defender, really efficient player, and he won a championship. So, and he could also lead his team pretty far. And I will say this, like, not to diss like Russell Westbrook whatsoever, but I think I would personally put him higher on my list if he could also lead his team in a way that like Oscar did. But that's just my thing. I mean, that's why I have Oscar number 2. Number 3, I also have Stephen Curry, just like he said. I think we all come to agreement now saying that he's the best shooter of all time, multiple-time champion. The only thing I hold against him is that he hasn't been the Finals MVP. And I mean, you could say 2017 and 18 he had Durant. 2015 though, he probably should have got it, but he didn't, and we can't like make ifs about that. 4th, I was surprised you didn't have him on your list. I have Isaiah Thomas from the Detroit Pistons, the Bad Boys. I mean, he's a Finals MVP, multiple-time champion, and I think he's probably like a top 25, 30 player of all time. I mean, I don't have the full list on me right now, but I'm just assuming. And the 5th one, this might surprise you a little bit. I think he's definitely up there, like around 7, 8 range. I have Steve Nash. I think Steve Nash, you know, he's also one of the best shooters of all time, arguably top 5, top 10, one of the best passers of all time. You know, he's a multiple-time MVP. And I'll mention my honorable mention too. My honorable mention is Chris Paul. No, I do not have John Stockton on my list. The only thing is because I feel like Steve Nash with less could do more. I mean, Amari Stoudemire played 3 games one season, missed like the other 79, and Steve Nash still won MVP and led him to over like 54 wins. You know, Chris Paul, he's always like such a grit and grind player. You know, he's always going to step up his game in the playoffs. When I looked at like playoff stats too, John Stockton stayed around the same. Some playoffs he was actually really disappointing, whereas both Nash and Paul elevated their game. So that's why I put them the way I did.
Yeah, once I kind of got past the first 3, it was just a whole blob of guys I could have chose from between Jerry West, John Stockton, Chris Paul, Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, Isaiah Thomas. To me, Chris Paul may be one of the most underrated players ever, and that's kind of why I really debated putting him at number 5.
Yeah, and I will mention, like, this is like what we're going off of. That's kind of a big reason why I did like an honorable mention, because some people could be considered like a point guard, shooting guard, or a power forward, center. But we're going like based off where they're located at. So, I mean, as we get into the top 5 shooting guards list, do you want me to start off or do you want to go first?
You can take it.
Okay, so the top 5 shooting guards of all time. Number 1, should really be no debate, Michael Jordan, greatest player of all time in my opinion. So I think we can move on pretty easily. Number 2, I think it's also pretty easy, Kobe Bryant. He's probably the closest thing from a game standpoint, like same game style, to Michael Jordan that we've seen. And number 3, I actually, a lot of people think I'd probably have Dwayne Wade, because I think a lot of people are saying he's the 3rd best shooting guard of all time recently. But this is where I mentioned positions. I actually have Jerry West. I mean, Jerry West won Finals MVP on the losing team. You know, won championships. You know, he was probably very overlooked. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't get a regular season MVP. But, I mean, this dude was an all-star throughout, like, the whole 60s. And, I mean, really, his career, I know he's often compared to Oscar Robertson. He probably lasted longer in his prime, I'd say, than Oscar Robertson. Very good shooter, and, I mean, he's the logo for a reason. So, I have him number 3. Dwayne Wade, though, I do have number 4. You know, he's also a Finals MVP and won multiple championships. Number 5, I have Allen Iverson. I don't think a lot of players could do what Allen Iverson did and lead his team to the finals that he had around him, with an aging Dikembe Mutombo, and then the rest of it, you have like Eric Snow and George Lynch and like all those players. I don't think a lot of players could probably do that. And then my honorable mention, and I put him honorable mention really because he was shooting guard. He was a shooting guard and small forward, I feel like, throughout his career. And I put George Gervin, the Iceman, probably one of the best scorers we've seen in NBA history. Very good defender, really big, really good athlete. Yeah, so I have to give credit to the Iceman.
To no surprise, I do have MJ and Kobe at 1 2, nothing there to say. Since I did have Jerry West in the point guard list, I'm obviously going to omit him from the shooting guard list. Number 3, I have AI. Number 4, I have Dwayne Wade. So I think the first 4 are kind of set in stone for me. Could argue Wade over AI, but I have AI over Wade. And then for the 5th one, I went James Harden. And to me, I didn't even really consider George Gervin as a shooting guard here. So to me, it was between Harden and Clyde Drexler, and I decided to give the nod to Harden already.
Yeah, and it was really tough because, I mean, I was also thinking of both. You said Clyde Drexler, James Harden, and I'm sure there's like other guys as well. But it was just really tough. I was really surprised though you went Iverson over Wade. Personally, I think Wade's a better defender. I think that was kind of the big thing for me there. But I mean, I can't really like argue too much. I mean, what Iverson did with as little as like what he had throughout that Sixers tenure, that's pretty insane.
Yeah, it's that 0-1 Sixers run that kind of puts it over for me. But if you're ready, shall we proceed to small forward?
Yep, you can start this one because I started the shooting guards.
All right, perfect. So for me, top of the list, don't think it's very debatable. LeBron James, second greatest player ever in my opinion. Number 2, I went with Larry Legend, Larry Bird of the Boston Celtics. Once again, don't think much of a debate there. 3 through 5 were a bit more challenging for me. I'm going with Elgin Baylor at number 3, another great all-time player. Number 4, I have a current player in KD, and I think KD has the potential to even pass Larry Bird on this list and get to number 2. And then number 5, I have Dr. J, Julius Erving.
Yeah, I think all the guys that you said I have mentioned somewhere on here. Number 1, I also have LeBron. I don't know if, yes, I would pick LeBron over Larry Bird, who I have number 2. But I don't know if it's like a surefire thing because I think you could argue that Larry Bird at his best was probably you could argue he's the second best player of all time, maybe behind Michael Jordan. The only thing that does it for me is just that LeBron's longevity and Bird's injuries is kind of the big thing that affects it for me. But it would have been really nice to see if Larry Bird was healthy, maybe played like 15 to 20 seasons. I think there'd be like a real debate there because Larry Bird was also a really good defender, which I feel like a lot of people forget about. But LeBron I have number 1. I have Larry Bird number 2. I have Kevin Durant number 3. I think he might be one of the top 5 most skilled players of all time. I mean, like a 7-footer who can shoot the basketball, dribble the basketball. Lately with the Warriors, and I mean, hopefully, probably when he comes back from injury with the Nets, he'll be able to keep up that defensive ability to that potential. Number 4, I have John Havlicek. He won tons of rings in the 60s and even the 70s, a finals MVP, one of the better shooters of all time, probably a top 15, 20 shooter of all time, and one of the better scorers, too, that we've seen that's kind of underrated. And number 5, I think the same as your number 5, actually, I have Dr. J, Julius Erving. Not really much debate there. One of the most athletic players, one of the most stylish players, I'd say, of all time. Not from like wardrobe type of style or whatever, but like just like on the court, like flashy, fancy moves. My honorable mention though was Elgin Baylor. I mean, he's also an insane scorer, really good rebounder for a guy who was only like 6'4", 6'5". Granted, he was playing in a time where a lot of people were shorter than they are now.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on it with Dr. J, where he might not be like a top 2 or top 3 small forward of all time, but to me, he's one of the most influential players ever in the game of basketball, and I think that's important to note.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen people like Michael Jordan who have come out and like said that as well. And I mean, he won MVP both in the ABA and the NBA. Not a lot of people have done that, so I think he definitely deserves to have a spot on this list.
Yep, and if you want to go ahead and start with your power forwards.
Okay, so yeah, my top 5 power forwards. Number 1, I feel like this is the general consensus, is Tim Duncan. 5 championships, 3 finals MVPs. He's one of the better defenders of all time as well. And a lot of people forget that in his prime, he was really lethal. Like, I feel like a lot of people nowadays kind of saw Tim Duncan around like 2008, I'd say, and beyond was not like the same Tim Duncan as like around 2002, 2004 range. So I think Tim Duncan's got to be number one. Number two, I have Karl Malone, second most points of all time, until probably LeBron ends up passing him, then he'll be third, but that's still an amazing accomplishment. Arguably the best player to never win a championship. Number three, I have someone who did win a championship, maybe the best one of all time, and that's Dirk Nowitzki. I think what he did in 2011, and I mean, it was kind of just like, it was almost like written perfectly because, I mean, he lost to the Heat in 2006, tried to get back, first round exit to an 8 seed. You know, it almost seemed like it would never happen, and then he gets back there in 2011, not only to do it against the Heat and Dwayne Wade, who was Finals MVP, but then you add LeBron, who is arguably the best player in the league, and Chris Bosh, who's another All-Star. And, I mean, I just think that was kind of insane because a lot of those players around him were kind of older. Number four, and this is really close with Dirk, honestly, is Kevin Garnett. Really good defender, really good scorer in his prime. The only thing I give the edge to Dirk on is that he was the Finals MVP in his. And, I mean, you can't really speak for the general managers with what they put around their players, but, I mean, Dirk actually got the job done and won the championship with his first team. I mean, I know Kevin Garnett didn't have much in Minnesota, but I think we have to take that into account. Number five, I have Charles Barkley, made the finals, won an MVP, definitely one of the best up there. And then my honorable mention, I went Bob Pettit, because he also did lead the Hawks to a championship, but that was also very long ago, in an era where a lot of people don't really give much credit to. And I believe personally, he's either the best or second best Atlanta Hawk of all time. I think a lot of people often credit that to Dominique Wilkins, but we also got to look at Bob Pettit. And this is coming from a guy who made a video about Dominique Wilkins being the most underrated player of all time. So, yeah, that's my list on those.
All right, so to me, the 5 players are kind of unanimous. It's just a matter of the order. Number 1 is the big fundamental, Tim Duncan. That's a given. 2 through 5 is kind of where I struggled. So you have Barkley at 5. I'm going to put Barkley at number 2. I know he doesn't necessarily have the achievements and accolades that some of the other players have, but in terms of sheer talent, I think Barkley is the second best. Number 3, I'm going to go with Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett on the Timberwolves was scary, man. People don't understand how good he was in his prime. Ended up winning a ring with the Celtics as well. Number 4, I'm going to go with Karl Malone. If it wasn't for Michael Jordan and those Bulls teams, those Jazz teams in the 90s probably would have won a chip or two. And that's something we'll get into later. And then number 5, I'm going to go with Dirk. It was another tough thing for me, right? Going 2 through 5 was tough for me to order out. But Dirk winning that chip in 11, as you mentioned, was incredible. Big underdogs ended up winning that series. But that's just kind of where I land. It was a tough list to go 3 through 5, no doubt.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. Like I said on the last list, I said like Durant might be a top 5 most skilled player of all time, and I mean, like Barkley might have the skill advantage over Malone or Kevin Garnett over Dirk, but like, and then also like you count like accolades, you count stats, you count, all this other stuff, what they did in the playoffs. It's really hard. There's no really right answer, whatsoever. But I mean, I think we both are in agreement that probably Tim Duncan is the best power forward of all time. So there's that.
Yep, and I'll go ahead with the centers starting now. Another thing to note that through the first 4 positions, we have all agreed on the top player of all time. So let's see if it holds for centers. Number 1, I'm going to go with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Most unstoppable move in the history of the game. I'll repeat that. Most unstoppable move in the history of the game, the sky hook. Number 2, I'm going to go with Wilt Chamberlain. Kind of tough for me between number 2 and 3, but I'm going to go with Wilt. 100-point game, obviously. Another older player like Oscar Robertson, but he just put up some numbers that were incredible. Number 3, I'm going to go with the big diesel, Shaquille O'Neal. So first 3. So with Shaq, just that 3-peat with the Lakers. He also won one with the Heat. He was just probably the most unstoppable player if you put his mind to it in the history of the game. Number 4, I'm going to go with Hakeem Olajuwon. had one of the better moves as a center. Good post game, good defender, very underrated in my mind. And number 5, I'm going to go with Bill Russell. A lot of Bill Russell's argument comes around his 11 rings, which is obviously incredible, one of the best winners ever in the league. But I just don't think he has the pure talent that the 4 above him do. And my honorable mention would be David Robinson.
It's pretty similar list to me, actually. I mean, number 1, I mean, we did go 5 for 5. I also have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Number 1, like you said, one of the most unstoppable moves ever. Arguably a top 3, top 5 player of all time. Number 2, I have actually Shaquille O'Neal. I think that he's just such a dominant force inside, arguably the most dominant player in NBA history. And, I mean, sometimes it was just like what he wanted to put his mind to. Like, he had the potential to be probably the best player ever. So I had to put him number 2. Number 3, we have Wilt Chamberlain. The only thing is he didn't quite win as much as Shaq or Kareem did. So that's why I got him number 3. Number 4, Hakeem Olajuwon. Also very skilled, won 2 championships and 2 finals MVPs. And number 5, just like you, I have Bill Russell. He doesn't have the skill as the top 4 people up here, but you could make a good argument that he's probably a better defender or a better athlete than these 4 guys above him. Not saying it's for sure, but it's definitely a possibility. And my honorable mention, I didn't actually have David Robinson. I had Moses Malone. I mean, he played so long. He won a Finals MVP and a championship with the Sixers. So, yeah, that's my centers list.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to downplay 11 rings, no matter which era you played in.
Yeah. So the top 5 handles ever. Should I start this one off?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so number 1, top 5 handles ever. I'm honestly, I mean, it's really tough. A lot of these guys deserve to be up here, but this is a current player. I'm gonna have to go with probably Kyrie Irving. I think just the way that he moves the ball, like he doesn't have a set move at all. I think some of these guys down here, they do have like kind of a set move to their ball handling or whatever that's just unstoppable. But Kyrie, he can do just about anything with the ball. Number 2, I have Allen Iverson, who had almost a killer crossover, and we'll get to another player with that later on. But Allen Iverson, I mean, he would always like drop people to the ground. If it's Tyronn Lue, he'd walk over you. But so I have him number 2. Number 3 is an older player that was probably way before his time. I have Pistol Pete Maravich. Pete Maravich, and the thing about Pete is that he was really good dribbling the ball as well, but arguably when it comes to like, passing the ball, because I feel like that's part of handles as well. Like how you can like control the ball like with your passes or wrapping it around something or whatever. Pistol Pete Maravich might be the best person that I have on this whole list at doing that. Number 4, Jamal Crawford. I think like he has that set move where it's like he goes between his legs and behind his back and a hop step layup. That's just insane. And I mean, he's just like really good on the perimeter with the ball as well. Number 5, another killer crossover person, Tim Hardaway. He probably was the mentor for guys like Allen Iverson, and then later on like Kyrie Irving and stuff, or Chris Paul. So I think we got to give credit to Tim Hardaway there. And my honorable mention, I have Jason Williams. The only thing about him is that sometimes like with his shots, like when he'll set up his handles or whatever, or set up something, it might not have always like executed necessarily. But he definitely had like the touch with the ball where he could like, do the elbow pass. He could, go between his legs, behind his back, wrap it around, whatever. And he's not necessarily on the talent level as some of these other guys either. So that's my list.
I like it. I can start off similar to you where I go Kyrie and then AI. Obviously a big argument there to be made, but I think Kyrie's handles are just so pure that I could not pass him up as number 1. Number 3, I'm actually going to go with your honorable mention. I am going to go with Jason Williams. In terms of just pure ball handling and passing, I think he is one of the best to ever do it. I know he doesn't necessarily have the all-time great player status that some of these others do, but I think his ball handling is there. Number 4, I'm going to go with the same number 4 as you, Jamal Crawford. Shout out to him. He should be in the league still. Not sure why he's still a free agent. My 5th one, I'm actually going to go with Steph Curry, another current player. Known for his shooting, obviously known for Steph range, Curry range, but to me he does have handles that are up there with some of the all-time greats.
Yeah, it was tough leaving out some player. Like Steph Curry was on one of my like next honorable mentions. I mean, I mentioned Chris Paul even when I was talking. Rafier Alston would definitely be up there. Skip to my Lou. So I think it's definitely tough. I feel like this is even harder to make than the top 5 list probably for each position, because it's just like all these players can do so much. That it's like hard to compare different eras, like what they could do, whatever. So yeah, so the best teams now to not win a title. So do you want to start this one off or?
Yep, that's
okay.
fine.
Okay.
The first 2 teams I'm going to pick, and I guess the third one in a way, never won a title all because of the GOAT, Michael Jordan. Well, for the most part, never won a title because of the GOAT, Michael Jordan. First team I have here is those 90s Jazz teams with Stockton and Malone. Second one I have are those 90s Knicks teams with Ewing and John Starks. Third one, I'm going to go with the late 90s Pacers team. So that's the Reggie Miller team that ended up losing to the Lakers in that one finals. Fourth team, I'm going to go with the mid-2000s Suns. Steve Nash, Marion, Amari Stoudemire, a lot of great players on that team. Shame they never. I'm going to go with one specific year of the team. That Kings team that lost to the Lakers in 2001, when there was a whole controversy about the fourth quarter fouls in Game 6. That team was stacked with Chris Webber and Jason Williams, Peja Stojakovic, Vlade Divac. They were really good.
Yeah. So like what I did, I went like each season or like an individual season for a team, and then I listed the years that they were that they could have had a realistic run. So actually my first team was your last team. I think the 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings, like you said, with Weber, Stojakovic, Mike Bibby, Doug Christie, Divac, like all those guys, that was almost like an all-star starting lineup, and I think they were somewhat robbed by the refs. But like from 2000 to 2004, they were always up in the running, and they just could never get the job done. Number 2, I have the 2006-2007 Phoenix Suns. Really from 2004 to 2010, they had a realistic shot of maybe winning a championship. But this season specifically was, I believe, the year where Steve Nash, it was late in the game, the Suns were about to win, and then Robert Horry just like elbowed him in like the score or the score table thing, and it led to suspension for Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw, and then ultimately they ended up not winning the series because those guys got suspended for a game, and that's really unfortunate because they probably would have won the finals against a Cavs team who had just a young LeBron, and that was about it. Number 3, I have specifically the 97-98 Utah Jazz, who were good from about 95 to 2000. But I think this year specifically, they had everything going their way. They had the record advantage over the Bulls in the finals, like home court advantage. I believe they won Game 1 in the finals. And, Scottie Pippen was getting older and with injuries. But then again, obviously Michael Jordan was still Michael Jordan, and they just couldn't get over the hump. Number 4, I actually went with a really recent team, and I went with the 2017-2018 Houston Rockets, who have been in the running like from 2015 to, personally, I think 2019. I don't know if they're ever going to win a championship now. I think last year might have been their last chance. That's just where I stand. But I think that year specifically, they were up against the Warriors, who had a healthy Curry, a healthy Durant, a healthy Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, all these superstars, arguably the most talented team ever, and then Chris Paul just got hurt and they couldn't win. And number 5, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder in the time span of 2010 to 2016 mainly. And the year I picked was 2011-2012 because that was the last year they had James Harden. Kevin Durant was arguably a top 2-3 player in the league. Russell Westbrook was a top 5 point guard in the league. I just think that with that much talent, not to mention like Serge Ibaka, Reggie Jackson, Kendrick Perkins, all those guys off the bench, it's pretty amazing they didn't win. And then my honorable mention went to the 1992-1993 Suns, who were good from about 91 to 95, with Charles Barkley, Kevin Johnson, Dan Marley. It's a pretty good team to not win a title.
Yeah, my honorable mention would have been the 2017 Rockets as well, so kind of an agreement there.
Yeah, This one might have been the hardest list, I'd say. Probably even harder than the handles one because um, it's like so many teams have come so close to winning, and it's hard to like compare eras because like then the only way you can kind of like judge is like comparing who won the title or something like that. And yeah, but I don't know. That's just the hardest part according to me on that.
Yeah, no, it was a tough list for sure, but I thought it was a fun episode today. I think that we will definitely take into account all of our listeners' comments, concerns, questions, kind of what they think we should continue to do during this hiatus as long as it holds out. Um, we'll bring back more stuff, this list, just fun debates, kind of stuff that we can talk about in the meantime.
Yeah, and also in the comments below, let us know like what you think about each of these lists. Like vote on your top five at each position, or your top five handles, or what you think about Gregg Popovich or Phil Jackson or whatever. You know, the Kobe Shaq debate earlier. Let us know in the comments. It's always fun to read, fun to see. But yeah, I think that's pretty much gonna do it. Uh, Thank you guys for watching, and we're out. Peace.
Peace.